The sunlight was streaming in through the curtained windows, creating fanciful patterns on the wooden floor. I sat in my old armchair, holding a cup of cold tea. This house remembered too much. Every corner of it held memories of Sybil. Sometimes I could even hear her footsteps in the kitchen or her quiet singing in the garden. 83 years was enough time to realize that the worst thing about old age was not an infirm body, but the emptiness around it. My name is Peregrine Quills, a rare name for a boy from San Marcos, but my mother was a lover of Victorian literature. I've been designing buildings all my life, from modest private homes to municipal facilities. My last project, a downtown library, was completed exactly 1 year before I retired. 20 years ago, it seemed like the end of my life. But then Sybil was still around. "Mr. Quills, you haven't picked up the mail again," came a voice from behind the fence. Chloe Mortimer, my neighbor on the right, was walking her pug at the exact time, 9 o'clock in the morning, as usual. Chloe was the kind of woman who, even in retirement, continues to live by a strict schedule. 30 years of work as a physics teacher had taken its toll. "Thank you for reminding me, Chloe." I slowly got up from the chair, feeling my knees crunching. "I'll pick it up today." "There's something from your son, I think," she added with a slight hint in her voice. "It's a formal envelope." "Really?" I frowned involuntarily. Ebner usually preferred to call. "Maybe it's something important." Chloe pulled the leash, guiding her fat pug further along the sidewalk. "By the way, yesterday I saw his car in front of your house. He's been stopping by a lot." I nodded, not wanting to pursue the subject. Chloe Mortimer was a nice woman, but her inquisitiveness was sometimes out of line. Widowhood had made her even more attentive to other people's business. The mail had indeed piled up in a matter of days. Among the flyers and bills was an envelope with the logo of the law firm, Higgs & Associates. Inside was a brochure on estate planning and estate administration for the elderly. Odd that Ebner had mailed it rather than handing it over in person on one of his more frequent visits. I made my way to the kitchen, made fresh tea, and sat at the table looking at the glossy brochure. "Protect your future today," the headline read. I grinned. My future had already happened. All that was left was the present, stretching on indefinitely. Sybil had died 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed too late. 3 months of agony, and she was gone. We had 52 years together, and every morning when I woke up to an empty bed, I still reached for her side. Our son Ebner had never been noted for his parents' affection. Ambitious and pragmatic from childhood, he chose a career in pharmaceutical marketing, married Haviland, a woman as good as himself, and settled on the north side of town. They bore us a granddaughter, Iris, now 21, attending university in another state. Ebner visited us on holidays, calling once a month. After Sybil died, his calls became even less frequent, until recently. A phone call interrupted my thoughts. "Dad, did you get the materials I sent?" Ebner's voice sounded unusually excited. "Good morning, son." I deliberately paused. "Yes, some pamphlet about an inheritance." "Why do I need it?" "It's important, Dad. At your age, you need to think about the proper distribution of your estate," he said in the tone of an expert explaining obvious things to a child with no brains. "Nah, Haviland and I are worried." "About what?" I took a sip of tea. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." "Of course you are," he agreed hastily. "But it's better to get everything legally organized beforehand. Remember Mrs. Eldridge of Maple Street? She didn't leave a will, and her children are still suing her." I remembered Gladys Eldridge, the feisty old lady who terrorized the neighbors with noise complaints. But what does that have to do with me? "I have a will, Ebner. Mom and I made it up 10 years ago. And it's out of date, Dad. The laws have changed." "Look," he sounded even more businesslike, "we'll stop by tonight. Bring dinner. We'll discuss it quietly." As I hung up the phone, I stared at the brochure for a long time. Something about Ebner's sudden interest in my inheritance seemed wrong. Ebner had never been known for sentimentality or concern for my well-being. What was different now? I rose from my chair and walked to the window. Across from my house lived Reed Tremaine, an old sailor with 1,000 stories and only one leg. He was in his garden now, trimming the hedges. Reed was one of the few people in the neighborhood I could talk to without pretense or convention. "Good morning, architect," he shouted when he saw me through the window. Come out and help the old sea wolf with those damn bushes. I threw on an old sweater and went out into the yard. The day was clear with a light breeze. Perfect weather for gardening. How are your bones today, Peregrine? Reed handed me the pruning shears. Mine creak like the deck in a storm. Nothing new. I took the tool and began carefully trimming the hedge. It's creaky, but it works. I saw your boy come by again. Reed leaned on his cane, watching me work. He's been showing up a lot. You too, I grinned. Chloe had already told me about it. That woman knows the bathroom schedule of every person on our street, Reed snorted. But that's not what I mean. Your son was asking me about you. I froze for a moment. About what, exactly? About your health, your habits? He asked if I'd noticed any strange behavior. Said you sometimes forget important things. The pruning shears in my hand snapped sharply, cutting too much from the bush. I don't forget things, Reed. That's what I told him. The sailor nodded. Said you were as sane as anybody on this street. But it was a strange conversation, I tell you. When I finished with the hedge, I came home with a heavy feeling. Had Ebner questioned the neighbors about my health and behavior? Why? Was it really? I pulled out an old box of papers stored in the bedroom closet. Among the papers, I found my will and Sybil's will. It was simple. The house and savings would go to Ebner when we died. What more could he want? The house was the only significant asset I owned. Built in the 70s, it wasn't exquisite architecture, but it was spacious, with a large lot in an upscale neighborhood. Real estate prices in San Marcos had skyrocketed in recent years, and even modest homes cost a fortune. Our neighborhood was being built up with expensive cottages, and old buildings were being torn down. Couldn't Ebner wait for me to die naturally? The thought was so absurd that I tried to push it away. My own son. That evening at 6 o'clock sharp, Ebner's black SUV pulled up in front of the house. My son got out first, followed by his wife Haviland, carrying containers of food. Dad! Ebner hugged me with exaggerated warmth. You look great. Haviland kissed my cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume and something subtly fake. We brought dinner from the Côte d'Azur. She showed me the containers. Your favorite seafood risotto and tiramisu for dessert. I nodded, though I'd never been a fan of risotto and didn't remember ever mentioning it. Come on in. I let them inside. It's been a while since you've been to my place as a family. Work, Ebner shrugged. You know what time it is. By the way, how's your memory been lately, Dad? The question sounded casual, but I sensed its true purpose. It's fine, I answered, looking my son straight in the eye. I even remember that you didn't like broccoli when you were a kid and hid it in your pockets and then threw it down the toilet, causing it to clog one day. Haviland laughed a little playfully. Oh, that's so sweet. I didn't know that story. Yeah, Dad was always attentive to detail. Ebner smiled, but his eyes remained cold. That's a good thing. But sometimes you forget to turn off the stove or lock the door, right? Wrong, I shook my head. It's never happened like that. But the neighbor, what's her name? Mrs. Mortimer said she saw smoke coming from your kitchen a month ago. I remembered that time. Chloe did come running, alarmed by the smoke, but it was just a burnt toaster. It's a common household situation, Ebner. No big deal. Over dinner, the conversation turned to the subject of houses and real estate. Ebner casually mentioned that the neighborhood had become too noisy, and was I thinking of moving to a quieter place? Like a comfortable boarding house for the elderly? Why would I want to move out of my own home? I set my fork aside. There's so much care work to do here, Dad, Haviland sighed. The lawn, the cleaning, the repairs. It's hard at your age. I can handle it, I said firmly. Mrs. Mortimer's son helps with the lawn. I pay him $20 to mow it. Still, it's no good. Ebner shook his head. Haviland and I were discussing, maybe you should sign the house over to us. We take care of all the expenses, and you could live here without worrying about a thing. That's it. I looked at my son carefully. There was greed in his eyes, barely disguised by feigned concern. How many times had Sybil told me we'd spoiled him, given him too much and demanded too little? I didn't listen to her then. I like owning my own house, I said calmly, and I'm not going to change anything. Ebner's face contorted for a moment. but he quickly pulled himself together. Of course, Dad, it was just an option. We're worried about you. He exchanged a quick glance with his wife. They didn't stay long after dinner. As they left, Ebner left a business card on the table. It's an excellent family law attorney. Just in case. We'll pay for the consultation. When the door closed behind them, I sat in silence for a long time, looking at the business card. Vincent Higgs, family law and custody specialist. Custody. It all fell into place now. My son wanted to take possession of my house, and to do that, he needed to declare me incompetent. He was gathering evidence, asking neighbors, looking for instances of my forgetfulness, probing for legal action. I went to the window. It was getting dark outside, but I could see Reed Tremaine reading a book in his chair in the house across the street. The old sailor had been through a lot, but he'd kept his dignity. Would I be able to keep mine? That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. It was not the pain in my joints, not the memory of Sybil, but the bitter realization of betrayal. My own son had planned to deprive me of my independence for money. Well, he didn't know his father well enough to think I'd give in without a fight. I may be old, but I'm far from helpless. In the morning, I decided it was time to act. And the first order of business was to find out how far Ebner's plans went and what exactly he wanted from me. For the next few days, I watched Ebner's behavior closely. He called daily, asking how I was feeling in a voice full of feigned concern. I replied that I was fine and tried to sound a little distracted, let him think his plan was working. Inside me, however, I was growing anxious. What is my son really up to? The answer came unexpectedly on Wednesday night. I was sitting in my office going through old blueprints, a habit I couldn't give up after retirement. The phone in the hallway rang, and I headed toward it, but stopped halfway when I heard the answering machine in the living room go off. Apparently, Ebner thought I was already asleep. Dad, it's Ebner. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Call me back when you can. I was about to pick up the phone when I heard Ebner continue talking. Apparently, he hadn't realized the answering machine was still recording. Haviland, he's not answering. Ebner's voice sounded muffled, as if he'd covered the receiver with his palm, but not completely. Do you think he's okay? What difference does it make? I heard my sister-in-law's irritated voice. The old man is probably watching his stupid documentaries and doesn't hear the phone. The important thing is that he doesn't die before he meets Higgs. I froze in place, not believing my ears. Don't say that. Ebner's voice sounded like a reproach, but a very faint one. He is my father, after all. Your father who's sitting on $3 million, Haviland snorted. $3 million, Ebner. This house and lot are a gold mine, and he's clinging to them like a cheapskate. We could pay off all our debts and still have enough to live on. I know, Ebner sighed. But if he calls Pharaoh, he won't, Haviland said. You said they hadn't talked in years. In fact, just in case, I made an appointment for him to see Dr. Pratt next week. He's always willing to sign the right papers for the right amount of money. Let's say you notice signs of dementia, forgetfulness, inability to take care of himself. The usual story. What if he refuses to see a doctor? We'll say it's just a routine checkup, Haviland replied irritably. Ebner, you're overcomplicating this. We've already discussed this plan 1,000 times. First the medical report, then the application to the court for a restraining order. Appoint you guardian. Sell the house to the developers. Done. And no creditor problems? No calls from the bank? No threats from that bastard McKinley? I felt my heart skip a beat. Ebner and Haviland didn't just want to help the old man with his estate management. They planned to steal from me, sell my house, and use the money to pay off some debts. Okay, Ebner's voice sounded tired. Tomorrow I'll stop by his place and try to talk about meeting Higgs again. Maybe this time he'll agree. Don't forget to write it down if he says anything strange, Haviland reminded him. We need more evidence of his inadequacy. Okay, Ebner clearly wanted to end the conversation. I gotta go. Love you. Love you too, Haviland replied. Don't forget to hang up. There was a click, and the answering machine stopped recording. I stood in the hallway feeling my knees shake. My own son. Suddenly I couldn't breathe, and I leaned against the wall, trying to cope with the weakness. The sense of betrayal was so strong that for a moment it eclipsed even my fear of the future. Sybil always said we were spoiling Ebner too much. He'll never learn to appreciate what he has if he doesn't work for it, she kept repeating. But I didn't listen, continuing to pay his tuition, buy cars, help with the down payment on the house. And so he repaid me with a plan to take away my last refuge, my home, under the pretense of taking care of an old man. I walked slowly into the living room and turned off the answering machine. The recording had to be saved. It could be important evidence of their intentions. But now I needed time to think about the situation and decide what to do next. Settling into my chair, I tried to calm down and think rationally. The first order of business was to deal with Ebner's visit tomorrow. I couldn't afford to give away that I knew about their plan. I had to keep playing the part of the unsuspecting old man, maybe even give in a little bit to put their guard down. But we had to act fast. If Haviland had already booked me in with some corrupt doctor, it was days away. I needed legal advice, and as soon as possible. Orson Farrow's name came to mind almost immediately. I hadn't seen him since Sybil's funeral, but if anyone could help me in this situation, it was him. Farrow wasn't just a good lawyer, he was a shark who never missed his prey. Besides, we had a history, a complicated history that could play right into my hands. I glanced at the clock, almost 11 p.m. Too late for calls. We'd have to wait until morning. I pulled a phone book out of my desk drawer and found Farrow's office number. In so many years, he might have changed jobs or retired, but it was the only contact I had. The morning was gray and dank. A light rain drizzled down the window panes, creating the illusion of tears. Just the right weather for my mood. I slept badly, waking up every hour and remembering the conversation I'd overheard the night before. At precisely 9 o'clock, I dialed the number of Farrow's law firm. "Mr. Farrow's office," a woman's voice answered. "What can I do for you?" "I need to speak to Orson Farrow," I said. "This is Peregrine Quills, an old, acquaintance. One moment, please." I waited, tapping my fingers nervously on the table. What if he refused to talk to me? What if our past came between us now, when I needed his help so badly? "Peregrine?" Orson's deep, well-pitched voice hadn't changed much over the years. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "Hello, Orson," I tried to speak calmly. "I need your help. It's, personal matter, rather urgent." There was a pause, and I mentally prepared myself for rejection. "Of course," he said at last. "When do you want to meet?" "As soon as possible," I answered with relief. "Tonight? Great. I'm on a tight schedule, but I can make time at the end of the day. Say 6 o'clock, in my office?" "That would be fine," I agreed. "Thank you, Orson." "Don't thank me too soon," he said, a strange note in his voice. "I need to hear what's going on first." We said goodbye, and I hung up. Well, the first step had been taken. Now I had to prepare for Ebner's visit. He arrived around 11, unannounced as usual. He brought a bag from the grocery store. "So you don't have to bother shopping, Dad." And a box with a new phone. With big buttons, especially for the elderly, and with an emergency call function. I accepted the gifts gratefully, inviting him into the kitchen for tea. He agreed, noting with satisfaction that there was nothing burnt on the stove and no dirty dishes in the sink. Apparently, he was looking for signs of my inability to run a household. "How are you, Dad?" Ebner asked when we sat down at the table. "Did you sleep well?" "Not bad," I decided to give him a clue. "Sometimes I wake up and don't realize where I am. Age, you know." Ebner's eyes lit up, but he tried to hide it with an expression of concern. "Does this happen a lot? Have you mentioned it to your doctor?" "No, it's only happened a couple times," I waved my hand. "Nothing to worry about." "Dad," Ebner leaned across the table to me, "I think you should get a full checkup, just to be sure. You know, a friend of mine works at a great clinic. I can get you in." "Dr. Pratt?" I asked innocently. Ebner flinched but quickly pulled himself together. "Do you know him?" "Shamana." "No, but Haviland mentioned the name the last time she was here." I lied. "Said he was a great expert on, what do you call it? Geriatrics?" "Yeah, that's right." Ebner leaned back in his chair with visible relief. "That's a really great idea, Dad. Why don't I organize a meeting next week?" "You can," I nodded, trying to look nonchalant. "Affirm. I'd prefer to finish the legal matters first, though. You were talking about some lawyer, Higgs, right?" "Yes, Vincent Higgs," Ebner perked up. "He specializes in estate planning and can help us update your will, make a power of attorney in case of incapacity." "Sounds reasonable." I took a sip of tea. What about the house? Do you think I should sell it and move to something more compact? Ebner obviously hadn't expected such a question. He ran his hand nervously through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood. Always did that when he was trying to hide something. Well, it's an option worth discussing, he said carefully. This house is big, requires a lot of upkeep. Perhaps an apartment in a nice neighborhood, or a cottage in a retirement community, or a nursing home with 24-hour care? I continued his thought. Only if you want it, Ebner hastened to assure me. No one's going to make you do anything you don't want to do, Dad. What an insolent lie. I struggled not to tell him what I thought of his plans. Instead, I smiled and nodded. Sure, son. I know you only want the best for me. The day of the family dinner came suddenly, even though I had been preparing for it for almost a week. Haviland had insisted on the event, calling it just a chance to be together. I immediately realized it was just another step in their plan, but I agreed, pretending to be genuinely excited about the idea. 5 days had passed since my conversation with Orson Farrow. We met twice discussing the details of the upcoming confrontation. Orson turned out to be unexpectedly interested in my case, working with an energy that would be the envy of a young lawyer. He had compiled an impressive dossier on Ebner. It turned out my son was deep in debt, tied up in bad investments, and possibly gambling. The company where he worked had downsized his position 3 months ago, but Ebner had been hiding it from everyone, including me. Does your granddaughter Iris know about this? Us sower, Orson asked at our last meeting. I don't think so, I shook my head. Ebner probably tells her that I have memory and self-care problems. She's studying in another state and can't check it out in person. Maybe we should contact her directly, Orson suggested. After dinner, I decided. I didn't want to embarrass her before she did. I chose my best suit for dinner, the one I'd taken Sybil to the opera for her anniversary. A little loose in the shoulders now, but still elegant. Sybil always said the color blue made my eyes brighter. I wonder what she would say now if she knew of our son's betrayal. The doorbell rang at 6 sharp. I took a deep breath and went to open the door. Daddy! Haviland kissed me on both cheeks, leaving traces of lipstick, which she wiped away with a napkin. You look great. What a suit. Ebner stood behind her with a bottle of wine and a strained smile. Hello, Father. Decided to dress up for the occasion? Family dinner is a worthy occasion, I replied, letting them inside. Come on in. I ordered food from the Golden Dragon. Oh, it's been so long since I've had good Chinese food. Haviland hung her coat on the coat rack in the hallway. Ebner's always against it, says it has too much salt. You have to watch your health, Ebner muttered, walking into the living room, especially at our age. I didn't say anything. Our age. He was clearly trying to make it seem like we were in the same weight class, even though we were 40 years apart. We walked to the dining room, where I had already set the table. The white tablecloth that Sybil only got on big occasions, the finest china, silverware. I had decided to make this evening special from every angle. Wow, Daddy, you really did your best. Haviland looked around the table with slight surprise. I didn't expect that I was capable of setting the table. I smiled. Many things can surprise you, Haviland. Ebner gave me a quick glance, but said nothing, busying himself with opening a bottle of wine. I hope red is okay, or do you prefer white? Red is fine, I nodded, especially with Peking duck. We sat down at the table, and for a while there was an almost pleasant atmosphere. Ebner talked about his work, carefully avoiding mentioning that he'd been fired. Haviland talked about her successes in community activities, about a charity event she was organizing. I listened and nodded, marveling at how skillfully they lied, both to me and perhaps to each other. And how was Iris? I asked when the conversation began to quiet down. I hadn't heard from her in a while. Very busy with her studies, Haviland answered quickly. You know, final year thesis. Shubmyoam. Yeah, she's always been driven, I agreed. Who would that be? Definitely you, Dad, Ebner raised his glass. To your health. I drank with them, watching as Ebner emptied his third glass. He was usually more reserved with alcohol, but today he seemed more nervous than usual. When the main courses were finished, I brought dessert apple pie, the only thing I could make myself, following Sybil's recipe. You made it yourself? Haviland wondered. Yes, according to Sybil's recipe, I cut the pie into equal pieces. Her mother taught her, and she taught me. Mom loved to bake. Ebner nodded with a rare note of sincerity in his voice. I remember waking up on Saturdays to the smell of her cinnamon buns. For a moment I thought I saw a glimpse of the boy Sybil and I loved so much. Sensitive, a little shy, with a kind smile. Where had he disappeared to? When did that boy turn into a calculating man willing to send his own father to a nursing home for money? I have news, Ebner said suddenly, setting aside his plate of uneaten dessert. Haviland and I have been discussing this for a long time, and we've come to a decision that we think is best for everyone. I put my fork down slowly. This was it, the moment we've all been leading up to. Ebner stood up from the table, resting his hands on the countertop. Dad, we can see that it's getting harder and harder for you to take care of yourself and this huge house. You often forget things, sometimes lose your bearings. Haviland and I think you would be better off in a specialized facility where professionals can take care of you. I'd take care of myself just fine, I replied calmly. You think so? Haviland interjected with an expression of fake sympathy. But we're seeing signs of aging. It's natural, Peregrine. Nobody's getting any younger. What do you suggest? I remained calm, though my insides were seething. Ashram. We found a great place. Ebner pulled a glossy brochure out of his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. Sun Harbor, a private boarding house for the elderly with 24-hour care, medical services, entertainment programs. What happens to the house? I interrupted. Ebner and Haviland exchanged quick glances. Well, it's unsustainable to keep an empty house. Ebner began cautiously. So, we were thinking of selling it. He's right, Peregrine, Haviland added quickly. Real estate prices in this neighborhood are incredibly high right now, and the money from the sale will provide you with a comfortable life in Sunny Harbor for the rest of your life. And the rest? I asked, looking her straight in the eye. What? She blinked. The rest of the money from the sale, I clarified, after the boarding house is paid for. Where will it go? Well, as your guardian, I would manage those funds. Ebner began uncertainly. My guardian? I raised my eyebrows. When did you become one? We've prepared the paperwork. Ebner pulled out another folder. Given your condition, it's the smartest thing to do. I'm your only son, after all. Who else is going to take care of you and your affairs? This house is mine. Ebner suddenly raised his voice, probably angered by my calmness. You always said you'd leave everything to me. I'm your only heir. Heirs inherit after the death of the testator, I said. I'm still alive, Ebner. But you are no longer able to manage your property, he almost shouted. Face it, you're an old man who can't take care of himself. This house is too big for you. You forget to lock the doors, turn off the stove. Ebner, Haviland put her hand on his shoulder, obviously concerned at his raised tone. Take it easy. We agreed to be gentle. To hell with gentleness. Ebner shook off her hand. I'm tired of beating around the bush. Dad, I'm telling you straight up, either you voluntarily agree to custody and relocation, or we go to court. We have Dr. Pratt's report on your inability to make decisions for yourself. Oh yeah? I slowly stood up. And when did Dr. Pratt examine me? Ebner was confused for a moment, but quickly pulled himself together. He reviewed your medical history and my reports on your behavior. That's enough for a preliminary report. I see, I nodded. Well, now that we're talking openly, let me get something straight too. I went out into the hallway and opened the door to the office where Orson Farrow had been waiting all this time. Akram, come in, Orson. They're ready to hear from you. Orson Farrow entered the dining room with an impenetrable face and impeccable posture, holding a leather briefcase. In his 70s, he still looked imposing. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a mane of gray hair and penetrating gray eyes. Good evening, he said, nodding to those present. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Ebner's face paled as sharply as if all the blood had been drained from it. Haviland made a quiet sound like a squeak and grabbed the edge of the table. Farrow? Ebner muttered. What? Why? Mr. Farrow represents my interests, I explained calmly. I asked him to join our family dinner when I realized where he was going. You knew everything? Haviland shifted her gaze from me to Orson and back again. Is this a trap? I'd call it a precaution, Orson replied, pulling a file folder out of his briefcase. Mr. Quills came to me after he overheard your phone conversation about plans to declare him incompetent and sell his house. That never happened, Ebner exclaimed, but his voice sounded unconvincing, even to himself. There was an independent medical examination, Orson continued, as if he hadn't heard the objection. Dr. Eleanor Steinberg, a leading expert in geriatrics, confirmed that Mr. Quills was fully capable of making decisions about his health and property. Orson placed a certified copy of the medical report on the table. What's more, Mr. Quills has ordered a change in his will. His primary heir is now Ms. Iris Quills. A copy of the notarized will is on file with me, with the notary and in Mr. Quills' safe deposit box. You can't, Ebner jumped up from his seat, knocking over his chair. This is invalid. He's been misled. His condition has been taken advantage of. I'm afraid Mr. Quills acted with perfect consciousness, Orson countered calmly. Any forensic analysis will confirm that. Besides, he paused, we have a tape of you and Mrs. Quills discussing a plan to incapacitate your father in order to take over his estate. This could be considered attempted fraud. Haviland had now turned pale. Her hand holding the wineglass was visibly trembling. A record, she whispered. What recording? The answering machine, I explained. You didn't remind Ebner to hang up at the end of the call. It was very enlightening to hear you discuss sending me to a nursing home and selling the house to pay off your debts. Ebner collapsed back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. God, he moaned. Oh my God. I propose the following, Orson said, spreading out the papers on the table. Mr. Quills is willing to drop the attempted fraud charges on the condition that you leave him alone and never try to infringe on his legal capacity or property again. And if we don't agree, Haviland tried to retain some vestiges of dignity. Then I'll be forced to turn over the tape and other materials I've collected to the appropriate authorities. Orson shrugged, including information about Mr. Ebner Quills's debts, his dismissal 3 months ago, and how he tried to solve his financial problems at his father's expense. I suppose it would not only ruin your reputation, but could lead to criminal prosecution. No, Ebner raised his head. Please, not again. We have Iris, her future. Iris, I'll take care of, I said firmly. She's always been a good girl. I don't know how you and Haviland managed not to spoil her by your example, but I'm grateful. There was a heavy silence in the room. Finally, Ebner nodded, admitting defeat. Good, we agree. He looked at me with a mixture of shame and anger. But you should know, Dad, we were really worried about you. It's just the circumstances. Spare me, I held up my hand, stopping him. I've heard enough lies. Sign the papers and leave. One more thing, Orson added as they stood up, ready to leave the house. Mr. Quills asked me to tell you that he knows about your deal with Esther Investment. He also knows that I was involved in that situation years ago. Ebner froze half a step, his face taking on a strange gray hue. You knew. I always knew, I answered. And Orson knew I knew. It was a secret that had existed between us for decades. If you try to harm Mr. Quills again, Orson continued icily, I will personally see to it that this information is made public. I believe it will end not only your reputation, but your freedom as well. Haviland stared at her husband in horror. Ebner, what does this mean? What's the deal? Not here, he muttered, already heading for the door. We'll talk at home. They left almost at a run, without saying goodbye or turning around. When the door closed behind them, I felt a strange emptiness inside. Victory should have brought satisfaction, but all I felt was tiredness and sadness. Are you okay? Orson asked, coming closer. I'm not sure, I shook my head. I won the battle, but I lost my son. Though I may have lost him long before tonight. He made his own choices, Orson put a hand on my shoulder. You're not to blame for his decisions. Maybe, I smiled weakly. Thank you, Orson. I couldn't have done it without you. You would have found another way, he replied with a smile. You've always been stubborn and resourceful, Peregrine. It's one of your best qualities. We walked to the living room and I poured us both a glass of brandy, an old drink I'd been saving for special occasions. This evening was definitely special, though not in the way I would have liked. What now? Orson asked, taking the glass. Now? I wondered. Now I'm going to call Iris and tell her the truth. She deserves to know what went on behind her back. She's a good girl, Orson nodded. Sybil would be proud of her. Yes, I smiled, remembering the way Sybil had taken care of little Iris, reading her stories, teaching her how to bake. Huh, she would have loved it. We sat in silence and sipping brandy and thinking about our own thoughts. It was getting dark outside the window, and our silhouettes were reflected in the glass. Two old men who had been through many victories and defeats, but who were still standing. You know, Orson said at last, I've always envied you. You had Sybil, your family, this house, everything I never had. And I've envied your freedom sometime, I admitted, especially when family life got hard. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, Orson raised his glass. To the truth, no matter how bitter it is. To the truth, I raised my glass in return. In that moment, I realized that, despite today's loss, there were still people in my life that I could count on. And perhaps that was the main lesson. A true family is not always one bound by blood, but one bound by loyalty and mutual respect. 3 days passed after the dramatic family dinner. I spent time in the quiet of my home trying to make sense of what had happened. Ebner's betrayal had left a deep wound that I knew would never heal. How could a father forgive a son who cold-bloodedly planned to strip him of his freedom and dignity for money? Orson called every day, updating me on the progress of the paperwork. His efficiency was admirable. In a short period of time, he prepared a whole set of legal papers securing my rights to the house and other property, as well as an updated will where Iris became the main heir. Tomorrow I'll bring it all over for you to sign, Orson had said during our last conversation. One more thing. I managed to find an old file on the deal with Esther Investment. The information there. Interesting. How interesting? I asked, remembering the look on Ebner's face when Orson mentioned the deal. Enough to keep your son in line for a long time. Orson sounded grimly satisfied. Turns out he was much more deeply involved than we'd realized. The next morning I stood at the living room window, looking out at my garden. Sybil's roses were beginning to bloom, but were still pleasing to the eye with their beauty. I remembered how she had always said that roses, unlike people, never betray their nature. They might prick, but not out of malice, but simply because they were made that way. The sound of a car pulling up brought me out of my reverie. It wasn't Orson's car. It was too sporty, too expensive. When Haviland stepped out of it, I felt my shoulders tense. What did she want? Had she and Ebner decided to keep fighting? The doorbell rang sharply and demandingly. I took my time opening it, giving myself time to calm down and prepare. Finally, taking a deep breath, I went to the door. Good morning, Haviland, I said, letting her in. To what do I owe this early visit? She looked as flawless as ever, perfect hair, expensive suit, makeup that hid the traces of sleepless nights. Only her eyes betrayed her inner tension. We need to talk, Peregrine, she said, coming into the living room uninvited. Alone without your chained dog, Pharaoh. Shimrenikrum. Orson's not here, as you can see, I followed her. But he'll be here later, so I suggest you keep your words brief. Haviland turned to me, and I noticed that her usual confidence had cracked like a porcelain mask. Look, Peregrine, I understand that you're upset, and you have a right to be angry, but what you're doing is destroying our family. What family are you talking about? I grinned bitterly. The one where the son tries to put the father in a nursing home to get his property? We really thought you'd be better off in an institution, she insisted, but her voice sounded unconvincing, even to her. Ebner's worried about you. That's enough, I held up my hand. I heard the tape of your conversation, remember? You were both very frank about your motives. Haviland sank down on the couch, suddenly losing all her aplomb. We're in trouble, Peregrine. Serious financial problems. Ebner lost his job. Our house is about to be foreclosed on. I'm not condoning our actions, but you have to understand, we were desperate. And you decided the best way out was to betray your own father? I shook my head. If Ebner had come to me honestly and told me his problems, I would have helped him. I wouldn't have given him the house, but I would have found a way to support him. I've always helped him. He's too proud to ask, Haviland sighed. And then he was sure you'd say no. You and he never really understood each other. There was some truth in her words that hurt me more than I wanted to admit. Ebner and I really were too different. I was an architect, a man who built solid structures, who valued reliability and solidity. He's a marketer, used to playing with images and words, creating illusions instead of reality. "What do you want, Haviland?" I asked straightforwardly. "Why did you come here?" She looked up at me with a mixture of fear and determination. "I want to propose a deal. You withdraw your legal actions and give us a loan enough to cover our debts and get back on our feet. In return, we will never again encroach on your home or legal capacity. After what you've done, you expect me to believe your promises?" I couldn't hide my amazement. "That's naive, even for you, Haviland." "You'll have guarantees," she said quickly. "Any kind you want. Signed bonds, guarantors, anything." I stared at her carefully, trying to figure out the real reason for her visit. There was something else, something she wasn't saying. "It's not just about the money, is it?" I guessed. "Something else is bothering you." Haviland's face twitched slightly, giving her away. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." I sat down in the chair across from her. "Is this about Esther investments? With what Orson mentioned during dinner?" Haviland bit her lip, clearly struggling with herself. Finally, she nodded. "Ebner hasn't slept all night since your conversation. He won't tell me the details, says the less I know, the better for me. But I realize this is something serious, maybe even criminal. And you're here to protect him." I nodded understandingly. "You know, Haviland, when Sybil was alive, she often said that we were spoiling Ebner too much. 'He'll grow up to be a man who thinks the world owes him,' she used to say. I didn't listen to her then. I thought it was a father's duty to provide for his son what he didn't have himself. And the result is a man willing to betray his own father for money." "He wasn't always like that," Haviland said quietly. "Schon Mom, when I met him, he was ambitious but honest. Something had changed in recent years. Pressure at work, the need to maintain a certain lifestyle. Excuses," I shook my head. "There are always choices, Haviland. Yours was made when you decided to send me to a nursing home against my will." At that moment, a bell rang at the front door. Haviland shuddered. "It must be Orson with the papers," I said, rising. "You'd better go." "Peregrine, please." There was real desperation in her voice. "Think about my offer. For Iris's sake, if not for Ebner's. She shouldn't have to pay for her parents' mistakes. Iris gets everything in my new will." I headed for the door. "Unlike you, I don't punish the innocent for someone else's sins." Orson looked surprised to see Haviland, but quickly got over his emotions. "Mrs. Quills?" He nodded at her with professional courtesy. What an unexpected visit. "I was just leaving." Haviland grabbed her purse and walked quickly past him, throwing me one last pleading look. "Think about what I said, Peregrine. Please." As the door closed behind her, Orson turned to me with a questioning look on his face. "Ewan, what was that?" "An attempt at negotiation," I sighed. "Offered a deal, I give them a loan, and they leave me alone. And you refused, of course." It wasn't a question, but a statement. "Of course," I nodded. "After everything that's happened, I can't trust them." But there was something interesting. Haviland was very concerned about the Esther investment case. It seems that Ebner didn't tell her the details, but she guesses that it's something serious. Orson nodded thoughtfully, walking into the living room and pulling a file folder from his briefcase. "This could play into our hands," he said. "If Ebner is so afraid of being exposed, then we have very strong cards to play." We sat around the table, and I began to sign the papers he'd prepared. A new will, a power of attorney, documents protecting my property rights. As I worked, my thoughts kept returning to Sybil. What would she say about all this? Would she approve of my actions? "What are you thinking about?" Orson asked, noticing that I was distracted. "About Sybil," I admitted. I remembered how she'd warned me about Ebner's proclivities. She saw things I refused to see. "She was always perceptive," Orson nodded with a touch of sadness. "And fair." "Yes," I smiled, remembering. "Remember the donation for the new library? When the council tried to embezzle some of the funds?" "You bet," Orson grinned. "Sybil gave them such a hard time at the public hearing that the chairman of the board resigned the next day." We both laughed, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away. We were young men again, swirling around a bright star named Sybil Drake, who had eventually chosen me, leaving Orson with only memories and a perpetual what if. She'd approve of what we're doing now, Orson said as if reading my mind. Protecting what's rightfully yours. But she'd be upset to hear about what Ebner did, I sighed. She'd always hoped he'd become more responsible and mature as he got older. Some people never really grow up, Orson shrugged. They remain perpetual adolescents who think the world should conform to their desires. When the paperwork was done, Orson suggested we get some tea. We moved to the kitchen and I put the kettle on. The sight of simple, familiar activities always soothed me. Water, fire, the aroma of tea leaves, the quiet whistling of the boiling kettle. You said you found a case about the Esther investment deal, I reminded him, pouring tea into cups. Orson nodded, pulling another folder out of his briefcase, a shabbier one, with pages yellowed by time. These are copies of documents from 15 years ago, he said. Thomas, when Ebner first started his career in marketing, his firm was involved in developing an advertising campaign for Esther Investment. They were promoting investment opportunities in a new construction project, the Gardens of Avalon apartment complex. I remember that story, I nodded. The project turned out to be a pyramid scheme, and many investors lost money. Exactly, Orson opened the folder. But few people know that Ebner was not just an ordinary employee working on advertising. I have evidence that he knew about the fraudulent nature of the project and deliberately participated in attracting investors, receiving a percentage of the funds raised. I swallowed hard. It's one thing to assume that your son is capable of unethical behavior, and quite another to have it documented. Thus, why didn't this information come out during the investigation? I asked. Because I helped cover it up. Orson looked me straight in the eye. For you and for Sybil. She was already sick then, and I didn't want you to have to deal with that as well. I was silent, digesting what I'd heard. Orson had risked his career, his reputation to protect my family. It was a debt I could never repay. Thank you, I said finally, for what you did then and for what you're doing now. You're welcome, he waved it away. I was doing what I thought was right, just like I'm doing now. What do you suggest we do with this information? I nodded at the folder. Nothing yet, Orson closed it. It's our insurance policy. Ebner knows we can use these documents at any time. It's enough to keep him in fear. At that moment, my cell phone rang. The number was unidentifiable, but I decided to answer it. Hello? Grandpa? Iris's voice sounded worried. It's me. Do you have time to talk? Of course, honey. I straightened up, looking at Orson. What's wrong? Daddy called me this morning, she said. Said weird things about you having some kind of conflict, that you changed your will. I don't understand. What's going on? I took a deep breath. So Ebner had decided to get Iris on his side. I should have expected it. It's a long and unpleasant story, Iris. Your father and Haviland. They tried to have me declared incompetent so they could take control of my house. What? Her voice shook with shock. But why would they do that? They're having financial problems. I decided not to go into details, at least not over the phone. And they thought it would be easiest to solve them at my expense. I can't believe it, Iris sounded shocked. Dad always said that you had memory problems, that you were getting scatterbrained. It was a lie, I gritted my teeth, feeling a new wave of anger. To set the stage for their plan. God, Iris whispered. Grandfather, I'm so sorry. I should have visited you more often, checked on you myself. It's not your fault, sweetheart, I softened my tone. You were away at school. It was natural to trust your parents. There was a pause and I could hear Iris struggling with her emotions. I'm coming to see you, she finally said firmly. This weekend. I want to hear the whole story from you in person. I'll be waiting, I smiled, feeling unexpectedly relieved. And Iris, thank you for calling. Love you, Grandpa, she said. See you later. When the conversation ended, I noticed Orson looking at me with approval. She looks a lot like Sybil, he remarked. The same determination. Yes, I nodded. And the same sense of justice. She's coming this weekend. I'll have to tell her the whole story. That's the right thing to do. Orson gathered up the paperwork. She has a right to know, especially now that she's become your primary heir. When Orson left, I was alone in the quiet house. Memories were all around, pictures of Sybil on the walls, her things I never got around to putting away. The echo of her voice that sometimes seemed so real I turned around, expecting to see her. "You have to be firmer with him, Peregrine," she said of our son. "Not everything can be bought with money, and not all problems are solved with a checkbook." How many times had I brushed off her advice, thinking she was too strict? How many times had I indulged Ebner's whims, paying his bills, covering his mistakes, giving him things he didn't deserve with his hard work? In my office, I opened an old photo album. Here's Ebner at 5, a smiling boy with a toy airplane in his hands. Here he is at 10, serious with the brand new bicycle I gave him for his birthday. High school graduation, going to college, his wedding to Haviland, the birth of Iris. When did he stop being the boy I knew? When did money and status become more important to him than family? I closed the album feeling heavy in my chest. Ebner's betrayal had opened old wounds, made me remember all the times I'd felt like I was losing touch with my own son. Maybe Haviland was right, and he wasn't always like this. Maybe I too had played a part in shaping the man he'd become with my overgenerosity and lack of toughness. But it was too late for self-accusations. Now I had to protect myself, my home, my dignity, and perhaps protect Iris from repeating her father's mistakes. I went to the window and saw Reed Tremaine digging in his garden across the street, an old sailor with one leg who never complained about fate or asked for favors, a man who understood the value of what he earned through his own labor. Maybe I should learn from him, I thought as I watched Reed methodically weed the beds, despite the heat and the obvious physical difficulty of the task. Stubborn, independent, proud of his independence. That evening, I called Orson to confirm the final details of our plan. We agreed that he would be present during Iris's visit. She would need to sign some documents as the new heiress, and besides, he could confirm the legal side of the whole unpleasant story. "Do you think Ebner will try anything else?" I asked. "Not directly," Orson answered. "But he might work through Iris, trying to get her to influence you. Be prepared for that." "I'll tell her the truth," I said firmly. "The whole truth, including the Esther investment case. She's a grown woman and she has a right to know who her father really is." "That's harsh, Peregrine." Orson's voice sounded thoughtful, but perhaps necessary. After the call, I sat in the dark for a long time, watching the moonlight paint fanciful patterns on the living room floor. The house I had so diligently protected suddenly seemed empty and cold, without the people who had once filled it with life. Sybil with her laughter, little Ebner with his endless questions, Iris who loved to hide in the closets during our games. Things change, I thought sadly, but not always for the better. Iris's arrival over the weekend brought a long-forgotten sense of warmth and life into my home. She showed up early Saturday morning, energetic and determined, with a backpack behind her back and a concerned expression that softened as soon as she saw me. "Grandpa," she hugged me tightly, "you're looking good. Much better than I expected after everything Daddy told me." "What exactly did he tell you?" I asked as I led her into the house. "That you were getting forgetful, sometimes not recognizing people, getting the days of the week mixed up." Iris shook her head. "I sensed something was wrong with those stories, but I was so busy studying. I'm sorry I didn't get here sooner." "Don't blame yourself, sweetheart," I squeezed her hand. "You're here now, and that's all that matters." We spent the morning talking. I told her everything about the overheard phone call, the consultation with Orson, the dramatic dinner where Ebner and Haviland had revealed their true intentions. Iris listened intently, only occasionally interrupting me with questions, her face growing more somber with each new detail. "I can't believe it," she said finally when I was done. "I mean, I believe you, of course, but this is so unlike the Daddy I knew." "People change, Iris," I sighed, "and not always for the better. Financial problems can bring out the worst in a person, but to try to send you to a nursing home against your will," she shook her head. "That's no longer just a bad side of character. It's a crime." By lunchtime, Orson arrived with the paperwork, and we spent several more hours explaining the legal aspects of the situation to Iris. She proved to be an attentive listener and asked intelligent questions, showing that she had inherited not only Sybil's beauty, but also her sharp mind. "So I am now your primary heiress," she said as she signed the last document. "Not that I aspire to that, grandfather. I'd rather you and Papa reconcile." "I'm afraid that's impossible," I shook my head. "Some betrayals cannot be forgiven, Iris." That evening, when Orson had left and Iris and I were in the kitchen eating dinner, the phone rang. It was Chloe Mortimer, my neighbor on my right. "Peregrine, darling," her voice sounded worried. "Are you okay? I just got a call from some woman claiming to be your sister-in-law. She was asking about your behavior, saying something about memory problems and strange behavior." "What did you say to her?" I asked, feeling the anger rising inside me. "That she was talking nonsense, of course," Chloe snorted. "I've known you for 30 years, Peregrine Quills, and if any of us has a problem with the head, then certainly not you. But it bothers me why she's doing this." "Thanks for the warning, Chloe." I glanced at Iris, who was listening intently to the conversation. "I'll explain when I see her." Before I could hang up, the phone rang again. This time it was Reed Tremaine. "Architect, is everything all right in there?" The old sailor's gruff voice sounded concerned. "Your son just came by with some papers. Wanted me to sign some kind of certificate about your erratic behavior. I sent him to hell, of course. They don't stop," I muttered when the conversation was over. "What's going on?" Iris looked worried. "Your parents are calling my neighbors and acquaintances, trying to gather evidence of my alleged incapacity." I shook my head. "So, apparently they decided that if they couldn't go through a bought doctor, they'd gather testimony from concerned neighbors. But that's—" Iris couldn't find the words. "It's disgusting." "Yes," I nodded. "And I'm afraid there's more. Knowing your father, he'll try to use everyone he can." My prediction came true the next day when we got a call from my cousin Vivian in Portland. "Chakradanonom, Peregrine, what strange things is your son saying?" she asked without preamble. "He called me yesterday and told me you could barely remember your name and wandered the street at night in your pajamas." "That's bullshit, Vivian," I sighed. "Ebner is trying to have me declared incompetent so he can take possession of my house. He's in serious debt, and he's trying to solve his problems at my expense." "Oh my God," Vivian breathed out. "I can't believe it." "Although, I can. He's always been a little mercantile. Even as a kid, he haggled over every candy bar. What can I do to help?" "Just don't believe anything he says about me," I replied, "and warn other relatives if he contacts them." By Sunday evening, it was clear that Ebner and Haviland had launched a full-scale campaign, calling everyone they could, from distant relatives to former coworkers. Fortunately, most of the people who had known me for years didn't believe their stories, but the very fact of such a massive attack was alarming. "They won't stop until they get what they want," Iris said grimly. "I never thought my own parents were capable of such a thing." "People are capable of a lot of things when it comes to money." I looked out the window, watching the sun go down. "Shana, your grandmother always understood that better than I did." That evening, as we sat in the living room, the doorbell rang. Ebner stood on the doorstep, unusually pale and tense. "Was Iris home?" he asked, not looking me in the eye. "We need to talk." "Come in." I stepped aside. "She's in the living room." Iris met her father with a cold stare that was so reminiscent of Sybil's in moments of extreme disapproval. "Papa," she said without her usual warmth, "Son, what brings you here?" "You're not answering your phone." Ebner shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. I was worried. "You were?" Iris sounded sarcastic. "I thought you were too busy calling all of Grandpa's friends and spreading lies about him." "It's not a lie," Ebner gave me a quick glance. "Your grandfather does need help. He just doesn't realize it. And Pharaoh is using his condition to his advantage." "Stop it, Dad," Iris held up her hand. "I already know the whole story. I know about your debts, the plan to sell Grandpa's house, the fake medical report. How could you?" "You don't understand," Ebner's face contorted. "We're in a desperate situation. The bank is threatening to foreclose on our house. Creditors are calling every day. And here sits your grandfather in a huge house he can't properly maintain, on a lot worth millions." "It's my house, Ebner," I finally spoke. "Mine and Sybil's. We build our lives here. And I'm not going to give it up just because you can't manage your finances." "It's always about money, isn't it, Dad?" Ebner turned to me, and I could see the lingering resentment in his eyes. It's always been about you deciding who deserves what. Always controlled everything through your wallet. What are you talking about? I was genuinely puzzled. I've always supported you financially, even when Sybil thought it was detrimental. Exactly, Ebner exclaimed. You never believed that I could accomplish anything on my own. You were always there with your money, your wise counsel, your patronizing attitude. You never saw me as an equal. I was stunned. All these years I thought I was helping my son, and he took it as humiliation? That's no excuse for trying to send me to a nursing home against my will, I said, trying to stay calm. You'd be better off there, Ebner insisted. Professional care, the company of other people your age. Dad, stop, Iris interrupted him. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about your father as if he were a burden to get rid of. I'm being practical, Ebner said. The house is too big for him, requires constant upkeep, and the money from the sale could help all of us. You mean, Iris clarified. You and your debts. And let Grandpa live out his days in an institution, huh? Don't exaggerate, Ebner grumbled. Sunny Harbor is a fine place, a private boarding house with a high level of service, which I didn't choose and which I don't want to go to. I shook my head. Ebner, I understand your desperate situation, but I can't let you decide my fate. So that's it then? Ebner looked around at both of us. You've allied yourselves against me? Your own daughter and your father? We're not against you, Iris said softly. We're against what you're trying to do. It's wrong, Dad, and deep down you know it. Ebner was silent for a moment, and I could see the struggle in his eyes. Perhaps somewhere in his heart, he did realize the wrongness of his actions. But desperation and greed were stronger. You'll regret this, he said at last. Both of you. When he starts wandering the streets in his pajamas, forgetting his address, remember this conversation. If that happens, Iris said calmly, I'll take care of Grandpa myself. Not for money, but because I love him. Ebner stared at his daughter, then turned his gaze to me. He's turned you against me, he said bitterly, manipulating people like he always does. No one turned me against him, Iris objected. I just saw the facts, and I drew my own conclusions. You're still young, Ebner shook his head. Nyoe, you don't understand how the world works. Someday you'll realize that I was acting in the best interest of the family. With these words, he headed for the door. He turned around on the threshold. You'll change your mind, Dad, when you realize that Pharaoh is using you and this house is becoming a burden. And I'll be waiting for your call. When the door closed behind him, I felt a strange desolation. It was as if something had died inside me, the last hope of reconciliation, of understanding. He won't stop, Iris said quietly. What do we do? What we have to do, I straightened up. We tell the truth to everyone who needs to know. Let's not let them manipulate people by spreading lies. The next day, Iris and I went into action. She stayed another week, taking a leave of absence from the university, and together we made a list of all the relatives and acquaintances we should contact. Orson joined us, providing legal documents to prove my legal capacity and expose Ebner's plans. We called people, invited them to visit, showed them the evidence. Many were shocked to learn the truth. Some admitted that Ebner and Haviland had already asked them to sign some papers about my strange behavior. I almost believed them, my old colleague Harold Jenkins admitted when he came to visit me. Haviland was so convincing, speaking with such genuine concern. If it hadn't been for our 30 years of friendship, I might have succumbed. They're masters of manipulation, I sighed. They always have been. The hardest part was talking to Sybil's sister, Elizabeth, who had always been good to Ebner. I can't believe the boy is capable of such a thing, she said, shaking her head over a cup of tea in my living room. Sybil was always concerned about his moral fiber, but I thought she was too strict. She saw things I refused to notice, I admitted. She was always more perceptive than I was about human character. What do you plan to do now, Peregrine? Elizabeth asked. Cut off your relationship with your son completely, I wondered. It was a question that had plagued me since the beginning of the conflict. I think so, I finally answered. I cannot forgive such a betrayal, Elizabeth. and I can't trust a man who has tried to rob me of my freedom and dignity once before, even if that man is my son. Sybil would be devastated, she said quietly, but I think she would understand your decision. By the end of the week, we had contacted everyone who might have been targeted by Ebner and Haviland's manipulations. Orson officially notified them that any attempts to spread false information about my condition would be considered slander, with all the legal consequences. They're cornered, Orson said as we discussed the situation over dinner. But that's why they can be especially dangerous. Desperation drives people to extreme measures. What else can they do? Iris asked. Legally, they don't stand a chance, and everyone they tried to get on their side now knows the truth. I don't know, Orson replied thoughtfully, but I'd advise you to be on your guard. His hunch came true the next day, when Haviland called us. Her voice sounded tense, but with a note of triumph. Peregrine, she said without preamble, we have something that might interest you and your precious lawyer. What is it? I put it on speakerphone so that Iris and Orson, who were nearby, could hear it too. The documents, Haviland replied, regarding the deal with Esther Investments. But not just Ebner's involvement. There's information about Pharaoh's role, information that could cost him his license and his reputation. I glanced at Orson. His face remained calm, but I noticed the muscles in his neck tense. What do you want, Haviland? I asked bluntly. The same thing I wanted before, she answered. A loan, enough to cover our debts. In return, we forget about the house and these papers. Blackmail, Iris said quietly. They've stooped to blackmail. Call it what you will, Haviland's voice sounded irritated. We have something that could destroy your precious Pharaoh, and you have money that could save our family from ruin. It's as simple as that. I looked at Orson. He nodded slightly, signaling that he was ready to accept whatever decision I made. You know, Haviland, I said slowly, a long time ago, Sybil told me that the most important thing in life was the ability to look in the mirror and not take your eyes off your reflection. I've lived a long life and made mistakes, but I've never betrayed loved ones for money, and I'm not about to start now. Is that your last word? Her voice sounded distrustful. Yes, I answered firmly. Do what you think is right. But know that with this move, you will destroy everything that was left of our family. You started it, Haviland snapped at me, by changing the will, by bringing in Pharaoh. No, I interrupted her. It started when you decided to declare me incompetent for money. And now it ends with my decision to sever all ties with you. There was silence. Then Haviland said quietly, You're going to regret this, Peregrine. Perhaps, I sighed, but not as much as you and Ebner regret your actions. I hung up the phone and turned to Orson and Iris. Are you sure? Orson asked. They really could have documents that could hurt me. Could you really get hurt? I looked him in the eye. Maybe, he shrugged. There's always a gray area in these kinds of cases, but I'm more concerned about you cutting the last ties with your son. It's not my choice. I shook my head. It's their choice, and I have no choice but to accept it. Iris came over and hugged me. You did the right thing, grandfather, she said quietly, and I'm proud of you. That evening after Orson left and Iris went up to her room, I sat on the veranda for a long time, looking at the stars. A strange sense of peace swept over me, despite the weight of the decision I had made. I was no longer bound by false hopes of reconciliation, no longer tormented by doubts. The path had been chosen, and now all that remained was to walk on it with my head held high. As Sybil would say, sometimes you have to let go of what's dragging you down in order to move on. And I was finally ready to let go. It had been 6 months since the day I made the decision to finally sever my relationship with Ebner and Haviland. 6 months of silence, reflection, and slow healing. Winter had replaced spring, and now summer was coming to an end, painting my garden in rich shades of green and color. Sybil's roses were blooming especially lush this year, as if reflecting the changes in my life. That morning I woke up earlier than usual. The sunlight was barely through the curtains, and the air was filled with the freshness of a new day. I stood up slowly, habitually feeling a slight ache in my joints, the inevitable companion of my 83 years. But otherwise, I felt better than I had in years. It was as if I'd gotten rid of a heavy weight I'd been carrying unnoticed all this time. After breakfast, I settled down in my favorite chair by the window, with a cup of tea and an old photo album. Today was a day of reminiscing and decision-making, a day I had been preparing for all these months. I opened the album to the first page. Our wedding to Sybil, she in a simple white dress, me in a dark suit, both young and hopeful. Then the purchase of this house, small, modest in those days, which we gradually enlarged and improved. Ebner's birth, the tiny bundle in Sybil's hands, her eyes glowing with happiness and pride. Page after page, year after year, the story of our family unfolded before me. Ebner's first steps, his first day of school, graduation, the wedding, the birth of Iris. So many moments that should have brought us together, but ended up powerless before the destructive force of greed. Where did I go wrong? That's the question that has haunted me all these months. Had I been too lenient a parent, indulging my son's every whim? Or perhaps the opposite, not attentive enough, too immersed in my work? Sybil had always been harder on Ebner, insisting that he learn responsibility and independence. And I often undermined her efforts by secretly giving him money, buying him expensive gifts, solving problems he should have handled on his own. "You're doing him a bearish favor, Peregrine," Sybil said more than once. "He needs to realize that not everything in life comes easy." I didn't listen. I thought she was being too harsh, that the child should be spared the hardships we'd been through. And here was the result, a man willing to send his own father to a nursing home for money. The phone rang, interrupting my unhappy musings. "Grandpa? It's me, Iris. How are you?" My granddaughter's voice always made me smile. She had become an integral part of my life over the months, calling almost every day and coming in on weekends when school allowed. "The best, honey," I replied. "How's your dissertation going?" "It's progressing." I could hear the smile in her voice. "Professor Jenkins says I'm on the right track. By the way, he and I were discussing your idea for a restoration program for historic buildings. He thinks it's an excellent initiative." "He does?" "I'm excited. Over the last few months, I've been devoting a lot of time to developing a project to preserve our city's historic architecture, an idea that's been brewing for a long time, but that I've kept putting off. I finalized some of the details. I'll show you when you get here." "Oh, that's great. I'll be there Friday night. And, grandfather," she paused. "My dad called me." I tensed up. Ever since Ebner and Haviland had carried out their threat and released the documents compromising Orson, family relations had become even more strained. Fortunately, Orson's professional reputation was strong enough to withstand the blow, but the very fact of such an act finally convinced me of the correctness of the decision to sever all ties with my son. "What did he want?" I asked, and trying to keep my voice neutral. "He asked about you. He said he was worried about your health," Iris sighed. "I told him you were fine, better than ever. He didn't seem to believe it." "What else is new?" I smiled weakly. "Your father only believes what is favorable to himself. I know you don't want to talk about it, Grandpa, but they're in a really tough spot. The bank took their house. They moved into a small apartment. Dad's working at some small firm for a lot less money than he used to." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. Despite everything that had happened, I couldn't be happy about my son's misfortune. "But it's the result of their own decisions, Iris." "I know," she agreed. "I just thought you should know." After Iris and I returned to my thoughts, Ebner and Haviland's fate was the natural result of their actions. But that didn't make me feel any better. After all, Ebner was still my son, flesh of my flesh, no matter how far apart we were. I stepped out into the garden, needing fresh air and movement. Reed Tremaine was fiddling with his roses across the street, as always. When he spotted me, he waved his cane. "Hey, architect. Beautiful day, huh?" I crossed the street to say hello to him. Over the past few months, our neighborly interactions had grown into a true friendship. Two old men who find pleasure in simple conversations and shared memories. "How's the leg today?" I asked, nodding at his prosthetic. "Non-existent as usual," Reed grinned. "And your bones?" "Creaky, but they're holding up," I smiled back. "Iris is coming on Friday." "Good girl," Reed nodded. "Sorty tea. You're lucky to have a granddaughter. Mine only asks for money and doesn't visit." "Everyone has their trials," I said philosophically. "By the way, do you want to come over tonight? I found a bottle of excellent brandy that's too good to drink alone." "I'd love to," Reed brightened up. I'll bring my Caribbean stories in exchange for your brandy. I returned home in high spirits. Despite all the difficulties of the last few months, life went on, bringing new connections and opportunities. In the afternoon, I went to meet Orson. His office, as always, exuded an air of confidence and stability. Orson himself, despite the scandal, looked focused and energetic. "It's good to see you, Peregrine." He shook my hand firmly. "You look great. You're holding up pretty well, too, for a man whose reputation was in jeopardy," I said with a smile. "It's just a reputation," Orson shrugged. "At my age, you start to realize there are more important things." We discussed the details of my historic preservation project. Orson suggested a legal structure for setting up a foundation to finance the restoration work. His experience and connections in the city administration were invaluable. "I've prepared the initial documents," Orson said, handing me a folder. "Take a look, and if everything is in order, you can start the process of registering the foundation." "Thank you." I took the documents. Iris arrives on Friday. I want to discuss with her the possibility of her participation in the project. She is finishing her doctorate in architectural history. Her knowledge will be very useful. "That's a great idea," Orson approved. "Speaking of the future, have you made a decision about the house?" That question was the main reason for my visit. For the past few months, I had been thinking a lot about what to do with the house, which had become a stumbling block in my relationship with Ebner. The house was too big for one person, requiring constant maintenance and repairs. But at the same time, it was filled with memories, steeped in our family's history. "Yes," I nodded. "I decided to make the house part of the foundation's legacy, with the stipulation that I could live there for the rest of my life. After I die, it will become a museum and an educational center for architecture students." Orson looked at me carefully. "And Iris? She won't get the house?" "She'll get everything else, my savings, my investments, the copyrights to the projects." I smiled. "And the director's chair in the foundation, if she wants it. But the house must serve a greater purpose than just being private property." "Sybil would approve," Orson said quietly. She'd always seen architecture as more than just buildings. "Yes," I nodded, feeling a lump come up in my throat. She said that good architecture was the frozen music that would outlive us all. After my meeting with Orson, I decided to take a walk around the city. The day was clear, and despite the heat, I wanted to walk the familiar streets, to look at the buildings, many of which I had designed decades ago. The downtown library, my last major project before retirement, still looked modern and elegant. Young people sat on the wide steps, reading, talking, enjoying the sunshine. Life went on around what I had created. In the park, I took a seat on a bench, watching children and their parents playing. A young mother was patiently explaining something to her stubborn son, who clearly wanted to do things her way. I smiled, remembering how Sybil had often found herself in the same situation with little Ebner. What would she say about our situation now? Would she approve of my decision to sever my relationship with my son? Or with her inherent wisdom, would she find a way to keep the family together despite all the betrayals? "Some wounds are too deep to heal completely," I felt as if I heard her voice. "But that doesn't mean you should let them define your entire life." Walking back home, I walked slowly, enjoying the warm evening. Reed was already waiting for me on the veranda, with a bottle of his own homemade lemonade. "I thought I'd start with something cool before I moved on to brandy," he explained, handing me a glass. "It's hot as hell today." We were sitting on the veranda, sipping lemonade and exchanging news when a familiar car pulled up to the curb. My heart jumped when I recognized Ebner's car. What could have brought him here after everything that had happened? He got out of the car alone without Haviland and walked slowly toward the veranda. He looked tired and aged, as if years had passed in the months. "Dad," he nodded to me. "Mr. Tremaine." "I think I'll be going now." Reed stood up, leaning on his cane. "I'll stop by later, Peregrine." "Sure," I nodded gratefully. Reed understood the importance of family conversations, even difficult ones like this one. When Reed left, I gestured for Ebner to sit down. He lowered himself into the chair, clearly uncomfortable. "I didn't think you'd come," I said, finally breaking the silence. "Neither did I," he smiled weakly. "But Iris insisted, said we were both too stubborn for our own good." I smiled, imagining my determined granddaughter reprimanding her father. She certainly took after Sybil in that. She's wiser than both of us, I remarked. Yes, Ebner nodded. Look, Dad, I didn't come to ask for money or forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you that I understand why you did what you did, and that I don't hold a grudge. No hard feelings? I couldn't hide my amazement. After what you and Haviland tried to do to me, you're saying you hold no grudge? I know how it sounds, Ebner grumbled. But we really were in a desperate situation, and I was really worried about you, living alone in this huge house. Anuenamas, so worried that you were willing to send me to a nursing home against my will? I shook my head. I'm sorry, Ebner, but I don't believe your intentions are pure. Fair enough, he sighed. I haven't been honest with you or myself. The truth is, I've always envied your success, your confidence, even your relationship with your mom. You two were always a unit, and I always felt like an outsider. I remained silent, stunned by this revelation. Had my son really felt excluded from Sybil and me all these years? How could I have failed to see that? We loved you, Ebner, I said quietly. We always had. We just expressed it in different ways. I know, he nodded. I know now. It's a shame it took so long and painful to realize it. We sat in silence, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. The evening sun gilded the treetops, and a dog barked somewhere in the distance. It was an ordinary summer evening, but for both of us, it was the moment of truth, the moment when the masks were removed and the bitter truth was finally spoken aloud. I can't take it all back, Ebner finally said. I can't undo what Haviland and I tried to do, or what we did to Pharaoh. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I looked at my son, trying to see in him the boy I had once held in my arms, to whom I had read bedtime stories, whose first steps had been greeted with rapturous applause by Sybil and me. Somewhere deep inside that tired, broken man was still my son. I can't promise that I'll ever be able to fully forgive you, Ebner, I said honestly. But I'm sorry too, for the mistakes I made as a father, for not listening to Sybil when she warned me of the consequences of my indulgence, about perhaps not making you feel loved enough. Ebner nodded, accepting my words. Tears glistened in his eyes, which he carefully held back. Iris told me you started some kind of project, an architectural preservation foundation? Yes, I was surprised that he knew about it. I want my knowledge and experience to benefit future generations. That's great, he smiled weakly. You've always had a knack for creating something meaningful. After Ebner left, I sat on the veranda for a long time, looking at the sunset. Our conversation hadn't brought instant reconciliation. The wounds were too deep for that. But maybe it was the first small step toward some new understanding, toward a relationship based not on illusions and expectations, but on accepting each other for who we are. Iris arrived on Friday and we spent the weekend discussing the details of the foundation project. Her enthusiasm and fresh perspective breathed new life into my ideas. We walked around town, visiting historic buildings that could be part of the restoration program, taking notes, taking pictures, making plans. You know, Grandpa, Iris said Sunday evening as we sat in the garden, I've never seen you so lively. It's like you've gotten younger these months. I have, I smiled. I'm finally doing something that really matters. Creating something that will outlive me, that will serve people for years to come. What about Dad? She asked cautiously. He said he came by to see you. Yes, I nodded. We talked. I can't say things are back to normal, and frankly, I'm not sure they ever will be. But at least we were honest with each other. Maybe for the first time in years. That's good, Iris squeezed my hand. I don't expect you two to become close again after everything that's happened. But maybe in time will tell, I shrugged. Right now I want to focus on the future, on what I can create and leave behind. And you know what the most amazing thing is? I feel that Sybil would approve of that she's there for me, supporting my every decision. I feel that way too, Iris said quietly. Sometimes when I walk into your house, I think I can hear her laugh, smell her perfume, like a part of her is still here with us. We sat in silence, watching the last rays of sunlight gilding the treetops. The cicadas began to sing in the garden, their monotonous song filling the air with a sense of peace and tranquility. I thought about the life I'd lived, The decisions I'd made, some wise, some wrong. About the woman I loved with all my heart and who was my compass in difficult times. About the son with whom we became almost strangers despite the blood connection. And of a granddaughter who became a bridge between the past and the future. A reminder that life goes on even when all seems lost. The house that had been a battlefield for so long was now a symbol of a new beginning. Not just a building of brick and wood, but a repository of stories and hopes, a witness to human triumphs and mistakes. And I finally realized what Sybil's words meant about good architecture being frozen music that outlives its creators. My music will continue long after I am gone, in the library building, in the restoration projects, in the future generations of architects who will study within the walls of my home. And perhaps most importantly, in Iris's heart, carrying a piece of Sybil and me into the future. As the last rays of the sun disappeared over the horizon and the garden grew dark, Iris and I returned to the house. It no longer seemed empty or cold to me. On the contrary, it was filled with life, with plans, with hopes. As Sybil would say, a house is not just the walls, but the people who fill it with love and meaning. And in that moment, I realized that despite all the losses and betrayals, I am still rich in what really matters. The love I've given and received, the work I've created, and the future I'm helping to build. Even at 83, life can begin anew if you find new meaning and purpose for it.